Most people today think they understand food. You open a fridge. You scroll through options. You pick what you feel like eating. It feels normal, it feels safe. But there was a time in America when none of that existed. No backup, no convenience, no second chances. If you didn't understand food, you didn't survive. This wasn't a lifestyle. This was reality. Long before modern systems, Native American tribes were living in environments that most people today wouldn't last a week in. Harsh winters that froze entire rivers, summers that dried out the land, long distances with no guarantee of finding anything to eat, and yet, they survived not by luck, not by chance, but by knowledge most people today have completely forgotten. They didn't just look for food, they recognized it. That's a big difference, because survival doesn't come from what's available. It comes from what you're able to see. Take something as ordinary as an oak tree. Today, it's just part of the background. Something people walk past without thinking, but back then, it was a silent provider. Acorns bitter, hard, unappealing at first glance, useless, but in reality, one of the most reliable survival foods available. They were collected, crushed, washed carefully to remove toxins, and transformed into flour that could be used in multiple ways: bread, porridge, thick soups that could stretch across days. This process took time, effort, patience, but that was the point, because when you depend on nature, you don't rush it. This was not cooking, this was understanding how to turn something inedible into life. And that mindset changes everything, because once you learn to do that, you're no longer dependent. Then comes something even more powerful: pemmican. If there was ever a perfect survival food, this might be it. Dried meat, crushed into powder, mixed with fat, sometimes combined with berries. That's all. No packaging, no technology, no modern preservation. And yet, could last for months, even years. Lightweight, easy to carry, extremely high in energy. A small portion could keep a person moving for an entire day. Think about that, in a world where food is heavy, perishable, and temporary. This was something completely different. This was engineered survival. This was not food, this was fuel. And in the most extreme conditions, fuel is everything, because when your body starts shutting down, you don't need variety. You need efficiency. That's what they understood. And that's what we've lost. Then there's something most people still underestimate: water environments, lakes, rivers, wetlands. Most people see water and think of fish. But Native Americans saw something more. Wild rice, harvested slowly, often by hand, sometimes in silence as a form of respect. It wasn't easy, it required coordination, patience, and skill. But what it provided was stability, a food source that could be stored, reused, and relied upon during the harshest seasons. In freezing winters, when hunting became nearly impossible, this was what remained. And that changes how you think about it. Because it's not just rice, it's stored survival. Every grain was a decision made in advance, a decision that said, we prepare now, so we don't suffer later. That kind of thinking is rare today, because today, everything is immediate. But survival has never been immediate, it has always been planned, and that brings us to something even more overlooked. The things people ignore, or worse, destroy: dandelions. Walk through any modern neighborhood, and you'll see people trying to get rid of them, spraying chemicals, pulling them out, treating them like a problem. But in the past, they were a solution, rich in nutrients, easy to find, simple to prepare. They could be eaten raw, cooked, or dried, and during times when food was limited, they became essential. This was not desperation, this was awareness, the ability to see value where others see nothing, and that ability can save your life, because survival doesn't always come from rare resources. It comes from what's right in front of you. but only if you recognize it. And that's where most people fail. But recognizing food was only the beginning, because finding something to eat once doesn't guarantee you'll survive tomorrow. And that's where the real skill came in: preservation. The ability to take something temporary and turn it into something that lasts, because in the wild, everything has an expiration: meat spoils, fish rots, plants dry out or disappear with the seasons. So the question wasn't just, what can we eat today? It was, how do we make this last when there's nothing left? And this is where things become intense, because the methods they used were slow, deliberate, and unforgiving. There was no room for mistakes. Meat was sliced into thin strips, carefully laid out under the sun or placed above controlled fire. Not too hot, not too cold, just enough to remove moisture without destroying it. Hours would pass watching, adjusting, waiting, because if even a small amount of moisture remained, it could ruin everything, and ruining food was not an option. This was not cooking, this was discipline. And the same applied to fish. Fresh fish might feed you for a day. Bad smoked fish could feed you for weeks. It was cleaned, salted when possible, and hung over fire until it transformed completely. The texture changed, the smell changed, everything about it changed, because it had to. It needed to survive time, because time was the real enemy. And when winter came, time became even more dangerous. Rivers froze, animals disappeared, plants vanished, the land went silent, and in that silence, only one thing mattered: what you had prepared before. That's it. No second chances, no emergency options, just whatever you stored, and whatever you understood. And this is where most people today would fail, because modern life has removed that pressure. You don't need to think ahead, you don't need to store, you don't need to prepare. Everything is available. Until suddenly, it's not, and by then, it's too late. But back then, they lived in that reality every single year, which is why even the smallest resources were treated with respect. Corn, for example, wasn't just eaten fresh like today. It was transformed, dried, ground, reused, turned into meal that could become bread, porridge, or thick stews that stretched across multiple days. One ingredient, multiple outcomes. That's efficiency. That's survival thinking, because when resources are limited, you don't waste potential, you multiply it. And then there's something even more powerful. Something hidden. Underground routes. Tubers. Food that most people would never notice, even if they were standing right on top of it. But Native Americans knew exactly where to look. They understood the land. They knew which plants had edible roots, which ones were dangerous, which ones could sustain them when everything above the ground was gone. Survival doesn't come from what you can see, it comes from what you know. Digging for food wasn't easy. It required effort, time, energy. But when the surface offered nothing, ground still held answers. And that changes your perspective, because it means, even when everything looks empty, it's not. There's always something, but only if you understand it. And that understanding was built over generations, passed down, protected, respected. Because without it, nothing else worked. And then there's another layer most people ignore completely. Small foods, nuts, seeds, berries. They don't look powerful, they don't look like they matter. But in survival, they matter more than almost anything, because they're consistent, easy to gather in large amounts, easy to store, easy to ration. A handful today, a handful tomorrow. Not enough to feel full, not enough to keep going. And sometimes, keep going is all you need. This was not about comfort, this was about endurance, the ability to continue, even when everything is working against you. And that's what these foods provided, not luxury, not satisfaction, but survival. And when you look at all of this together, it starts to feel less like food, and more like a system built on awareness, patience, and respect, because survival was never about one big discovery, it was about small consistent decisions, made every single day: what to collect, what to store, what to eat now, and what to save for later. Every choice mattered because every mistake had consequences. And that's something modern life has almost completely erased. Today, food is everywhere. Fast, easy, unlimited. You don't have to think about seasons. You don't have to worry about storage. You don't have to prepare for months ahead. Everything is available instantly. And because of that, something important disappeared. Awareness. The ability to walk through nature and recognize opportunity, to see a tree and know what it offers, to see a plant and understand its value, to see the land and trust that it can provide. That connection is gone for most people, and without it, we've become dependent on systems we don't control, on supply chains we don't understand, on convenience that can disappear without warning. And that's where this story becomes real, because these ancient Native American foods, they weren't just about survival in the past. They are a reminder of what humans are actually capable of. Because think about it, no stores, no technology, no backup, and still, they survived, not just individuals, entire communities, for generations. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because of knowledge, because of discipline, because of a mindset that refuses to depend on luck. And maybe that's the most powerful part of all. It wasn't the food itself, it was how they thought about it. They didn't waste, they didn't ignore, they didn't take anything for granted, because they understood something deeply. Everything around you has value if you know how to use it, and today, that idea feels almost foreign, because we've been trained to look for convenience, not capability. We look for what's easy, not what's possible. And that shift has made us weaker, not physically, but mentally. Because when everything is provided, you forget how to provide for yourself. And that's the real loss, not the food, but the knowledge, the mindset, the connection. Because if everything stopped tomorrow, most people wouldn't know where to begin. They wouldn't recognize food, even if it was right in front of them. And that's a dangerous place to be. Because survival doesn't wait for you to figure things out, it demands that you already know. And that's why this matters, not just as history, but as awareness. Because the truth is, these foods are not gone. They still exist, in forests, in rivers, in open land most people ignore every single day. The only difference is, we stopped seeing them. And maybe it's time to change that. Maybe it's time to start looking differently. To pay attention, to learn, even a little. Because you don't need to live like they did, to benefit from what they knew. Even understanding one of these foods changes something in your mind. It builds awareness. It builds confidence. It reminds you that survival is not impossible, it's a skill. And skills can be learned. So here's something to think about. If everything around you disappeared, if convenience was gone, if you had to rely only on nature, would you recognize even one thing you could eat? Or would you walk past survival without even knowing it? That question is more important than it seems, because the difference between knowing and not knowing is everything. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these surprised you the most? And more importantly, which one would you actually try? Drop your answer in the comments, because the truth is, these foods may be forgotten, the need to survive never disappeared.